Yo, what up? Welcome back, everybody. My name is Rob Markman. Shout out to everybody who's been coming to the channel, supporting, the music content. We've been talking a ton about Drake versus Kendrick Lamar. But when you see the blue background, it's something different going on, something entirely different. I don't have a name for this podcast either, because it's not a podcast, you know that. But we're gonna call this I Got Issues. That's the name. I bet you somebody else has that name, but I got issues with Rob Markman. We're gonna run with that for the time being. This is where I talk about, another one of my passions is comic books. If you've seen the last episode, I walked y'all through how I wrote my first comic story for Marvel. It was a 2-page Silver Surfer story. And I want to make this an ongoing thing, man. And shout out to my man, Young Guru. He's been telling me, yo, you got to do this. You got to do this. You got to be consistent with this. We talk about comic books all the time. A lot of people in hip hop, a lot of artists that you wouldn't expect, or producers, or just figures in hip hop, man. Like, more so than music, we talk about comic books. So I just wanted to share this space. I've been collecting comic books since I was a kid. My first job was in the comic book store, Brain Damage Comics. That's the blue background is a homage to the storefront. My brother, one of my best friends, Damian Scott, accomplished comic book artist. And, it's just a passion of mine. So, the hottest thing in comic books right now is X-Men 97. Look, I'm gonna be honest, between the past 2 weeks in pop culture, for me, it's been Drake versus Kendrick Lamar, NBA playoffs, and X-Men 97. Like, that's it. I don't really have room in my life for anything else outside of work and family and stuff like that. So X-Men 97 has been killing it. The last episode 9, if you haven't seen episode 9, don't watch this because there's going to be spoilers. But if you saw episode 9, the ending was incredible, where we see Wolverine versus Magneto. And Magneto pulls the adamantium metal from Wolverine's claws. It was dramatic. The amazing thing is, they're pulling everything from the comics, right? Like, and it's like different eras of X-Men. All of this storyline that you're seeing, if you're not familiar with the comics, I'm going to walk you through that story of how Magneto pulls the metal bones from Wolverine, right? But, if you're not familiar with the comics and you're watching the series and you're enjoying the series, one of the amazing things that they do is they're pulling different stories from all different eras of the X-Men. There's nods to the 80s in here, 90s, late 90s, so they're pulling from all over. In the comic books, all of this stuff happened throughout the whole season, but it didn't happen like in one continuous storyline. They're pulling from a bunch of different eras and making one continuous storyline. So, like, for example, early in the season, Uncanny X-Men 200, we saw the trial of Magneto, right? Y'all remember this costume if y'all could see it on screen. And when he went in front of the UN, Madeline Pryor, we seen Inferno play out during this season. We seen Life Death with Forge and Storm when Storm loses her powers. So Life Death 1 and 2, amazing. This right here is one of my favorite X-Men covers. Barry Windsor Smith, just an amazing artist. And then we seen, Bastion. This is the first appearance of Bastion on Uncanny X-Men 333. This happened in 1996. These were in the 80s. So, it's amazing how they're pulling from all over and they're weaving this story. So, Magneto pulling out Wolverine's metal is what everybody's talking about, right? And that happened right here. It was in the crossover called Fatal Attractions. And I think this was in 1993. These came out. It was the 30th anniversary of X-Men. So I think X-Men was 63. So 1993 would be the 30th anniversary. But it went through X Factor, X-Force. And as you see, they have these cool, like, holograms on the cover. Uncanny X-Men. There were 2 X-Men titles. Then X-Men 25. This is where Magneto actually does the thing. I'll put it on screen for you. Y'all be able to see it. You can kind of tell by the cover, him and Wolverine are going through something. Then Wolverine 75 is a continuation, with the metal being pulled out of Wolverine. And then it ended with Excalibur 71. So y'all all saw X-Men 97, I'm assuming, or the ones that saw it. So I'm just going to walk you through Fatal Attractions a little bit. I'm going to talk more about the comic book angle of it. But, at this point in the story, Magneto had been presumed dead. I think it was since X-Men number 3, the Jim Lee series. I think he died in like 3 or 4. And, the X-Men thought he was dead. And, he comes back stronger than ever, but it slowly happens. So X Factor starts the story. They this is just where it begins, and they start to hint that Magneto is back. The cool thing that happened, right? Here's X-Force, and Cable is in X-Force. So if you watch X-Men 97, you see that Cable, that Cable is like half metal. He has a bionic arm, he has the bionic eye. Magneto is so powerful, and when he comes back, he has all this power. One of the cool things that happened in the comic book that didn't happen in the cartoon is before, he ripped Wolverine apart, Magneto actually used his power to rip Cable apart. Ripped off his bionic arm, his leg, like the whole half of Cable's body is metal. Ripped them right apart in X Factor 25. So this was kind of cool. Like, they could have, because we have Cable in 97, they could have put this in the cartoon, but they didn't. It would have been a lot, but he rips Cable apart. In this one, in Uncanny X-Men 304, is funny because there's the scene in 97 where Magneto comes with the asteroid and he comes to Xavier's school. The mansion is all destroyed. And he makes his speech that he's sick of doing it Professor X's way. He tried to be the good guy with them, and he couldn't do it. And it's time for them to try it his way. And obviously Xavier's not going for that. But he makes a pledge to all the X-Men, hey, if you guys want to come with me, come with me. So you see Rogue go with him, right? And you see Sunspot go with him. And this actually was pulled from this issue too, right here. But the difference was it wasn't Rogue that went with him and Sunspot. It was Colossus. Because in Uncanny X-Men 304, Colossus, it's the funeral of Ilana, who is Colossus's sister, right? So she was in the comic book for a long time. She dies. They have the funeral. Colossus is like disenfranchised. He just doesn't believe in Xavier's dream, the peaceful way anymore. And he goes with Magneto. So it's funny, the juxtaposition. Like that happened in the comic book too. They just switched the characters. And instead of that piece of rock, it almost like it was like an asteroid, but it's a piece of rock that Magneto lifted from the water, and I guess that's his new base, and he's moving around with that. He had Cable's ship. It's a ship called Greymalkin that he turned into Avalon. So basically what Magneto was doing in the comic book was he was creating a safe haven for mutants. He actually called it Heaven. And he had Exodus. He had a character named Exodus kind of come down to Earth and like preach Magneto's word and try to recruit mutants and accept them into heaven. So, the big floating thing is in the air, but it's not a rock in the comic book. In the comic book, it's actually a ship. And so Colossus goes with him because his sister just died, and he's just like, yo, fuck this. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm sick of this. I'm sick of Xavier. He kind of goes off on Xavier the same way Rogue did. So they took that from the comic book. They just switched it up. And then we get to X-Men 25. And, at this point, Xavier is funny. Xavier gives, early in the issue when they're planning their attack, he's just like, yo, we got to really take Magneto out. Like, normally he's just like, yo, we got to capture him or whatever. But Xavier alludes to killing Magneto. Like, Wolverine is like, yo, are you saying what I'm thinking? Wolverine is like, are you saying what I think you're saying? And, Xavier is like, yeah, you know exactly what I'm saying. So, we get to the scene in this comic where Magneto's son, Quicksilver's Magneto's son, attacks Magneto, and Magneto feels like really betrayed. He was like, damn, out of all the mutants, out of all the X-Men, you're my own son, you're my own flesh and blood. Like, you're going to do this to me. So it was enough of an emotional distraction, and Magneto actually was about to kill his son. So that's what happened. Like, so you see how far he's willing to go because he's willing to kill his son. And that's where Wolverine comes in, saves Quicksilver, stabs Magneto with his claws. And it's funny, maybe because of the comic code back then of what they couldn't show, but it was really tame in the comic. Like, you didn't see blood at all. You didn't see the claws go through Magneto's body. It's so interesting that Disney Plus was more gory. Like, the scene in Disney Plus was way more gory than it was in the comic book. You actually see Wolverine's claws go through his body. But, Wolverine stabs Magneto, and then Magneto just does the deed, uses his powers, and it was as if he liquefied the adamantium, like he made it and like pulled it out through his pores. So, if you know the X-Men story, as Weapon X, that adamantium, that metal was bonded to Wolverine's bones. So he just undid the process. Then we get to Wolverine 75, and in this issue, like, they basically have to save Wolverine, and he has a healing factor, right? So they got to kind of stop his body from going into shock, and his mind and the mental strain for him to just long enough for his body to heal from the wounds. And when we get to the end of this issue, Wolverine learns, my claws are bone. Like, prior to this, he didn't know it. So my claws are bone. And, because part of his memory and his mind and his thoughts have been buried. So he didn't fully remember the process, but it's like, my claws are bone. And somehow the metal was bonded to me. And he didn't realize that at the time. So now we get a totally different version of Wolverine. Still has the claws, but they're bone. They hurt him more every time they pop in and out. There's a scene in here where he's talking with Jubilee, and she's asking if it hurts, and he's like, yeah. And he's kind of like, yo, no matter if I'm fighting or what, a few times a day I gotta pop the claws in and out to keep the wound open. He was like, it's like a piercing. Like, the same thing if you take your earring out, the hole closes up. He was like, he has to do the same thing with his bones. So, I just think we're going to see a different version of Wolverine, which is ill, because in this series, in the X-Men 97 series, Wolverine has been kind of like, I don't want to say docile, but he definitely isn't like the aggressor that he was, especially in the original series. I think they did that because they had to make Cyclops. They had to reestablish Cyclops as the leader. Cyclops was always the leader and a badass. And in the original X-Men animated series, he literally became like a punching bag for Wolverine. And in the first animated series, I think they were trying to Wolverine was such a popular character at the time. They were really trying to oversell Wolverine, and to do that, they made Cyclops kind of look like a pansy, so to speak. So one of the great things that X-Men 97 did is that they reestablished Cyclops as a strong leader with a backbone. Still with some humanity. He's questioning himself. He's questioning Xavier. But if you notice throughout this series, he hasn't been taking Wolverine's shit at all. So Wolverine has kind of been regulated, not to the background, but Wolverine just isn't maybe the Wolverine that we grew up watching. And I think what this is setting up now is that when he bounces back from this, he's going to be a whole different beast, like literally. So I think all of it, I don't think this is going to play out in episode 10. I think this is setting up season 2. There's a couple of other things that I think might be happening in season 2 that I'll speak about next week. I'm going to come back. I can't wait for episode 10. That's the season finale. And I'm going to come back and talk about the season in length, right? But I want to see that play out first, and then we'll kind of like, talk about where, the next season might be going, because there's definitely going to be a next season. But Yeah, that's where I'm at with it, man. I was so impressed by this week's episode. I just wanted to go through the comic books a little bit, um, and give a background to that story, man. X-Men 97 has been amazing. I can't wait for the next episode. And we're gonna be right back here like next week for sure. We're gonna do another episode of this. If you stuck around long enough, hit me in the comments. Let me know some of the topics that you want to discuss. I got upcoming ideas. I want to talk about Blood Hunt, is the new Marvel crossover series. So, we might do that next week. There's an independent comic that I'm reading called Beneath the Trees Where Nobody Sees. I want to break that down. Like, I don't know if y'all are reading that. So that'll be an upcoming episode. I'm going to go through these back issues. And I mean, as you can see, I got so many comics back here. So, just let me know what y'all want to talk about. Some of the topics that y'all have. And y'all know I'll talk back. All right? Peace.